Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining on this midsummer day. So instead of going on vacation, you decided to listen to a webinar about metrics, which is awesome. Today, we'll talk about how do we connect the metrics for product strategy and revenue. It's like the big topic for today. My name is Tanya. I work as a product manager at Metabase. Before, Metabase is a BI tool. So basically, it's like about analytics and visualization of data and metrics. Before that, I worked as a VP of product growth and incubation at PandaDoc. And it was like a very kind of nice company to be in. I was there for 6 years and was running a very big product team. So around like 12 product managers, 40 developers. And like the company grew from basically being like a very small company to a unicorn in the meantime. So it's like a lot of experience that I will be sharing today is basically based on my work at PandaDoc. So a little agenda, what we will talk about today. So we will like talk about metrics and what kind of metrics matter and for whom. Then we will try to understand how do we connect like product metrics, most popular one, with the revenue metrics and which metrics you can have goals on as a product manager and which metrics I would not recommend to have as your like goals for OKRs, for example. And the last small section about tips on how to set up the metrics framework and how to collect data and perform the analysis, because usually it's like also kind of like a problem in many companies. Okay, so like let's start with the question of why metrics matter overall and like for whom, what kind of metrics matter. In a typical software company that is trying to be data-driven, probably you have this in your company. There are a lot of data, and usually there are a lot of dashboards, a lot of visualizations, and like there are like a lot of them. Basically, different people come and like create new charts and visualizations, and soon enough, there is so much like data and dashboards that it's really hard to understand what kind of metrics are underneath all of this and what kind of data is underneath all of this. So it's like it's all quite often, very often, it's quite messy. And like what happens is usually different departments in the company, they kind of start to care about like a different set of metrics and they have their own set of KPIs. As a result, like we have, for example, C-level and investors team looking at more at like financial model and how the startup is growing, mostly at monthly recurring revenue growth year over year, month over month, ARPA, churn, NPS, like very high level metrics that allow like C-level and investors team to understand like if the product is moving in the right direction or not. And they're usually benchmarking this and like they know that your company, for example, is doing well on benchmarks or not that well. And thus they compare the companies in their portfolio and decide whether or not they will further invest into your company, for example. So it's like a very high level set of metrics. Then we have, for example, a sales team. Sales team usually cares about how many deals they won, what kind of like revenue amount they brought in, what kind of revenue amount is there in the sales pipeline, what is the close rate and the win rate for the deals they're working on. The marketing team cares about the number of leads they attract to the website or to the product. They care about the customer acquisition cost for these leads, like CPC and CPL costs, about the payback period and LTV. Success team like cares about like very different things. Oftentimes it's around the customer satisfaction, the time to reply to tickets, like the number of tickets they have in Zendesk or like other tools. Sometimes they care about expansion deals also about like the churn rate that the company has and like how many customers churn. So among like all of these teams, like product team is kind of like left like in between all of these. So it's like also hard like not to kind of follow and think about like some set of metrics that the product team cares about. So it's like a unique set for the product team. But like what happens, like usually again with the company that is growing, is that like if there are like more product managers being hired, more teams, more development teams like being formed, they're usually formed around feature areas. Not often they're formed around some kind of like metrics or customer journey. So this is like more rare. But like again, like the most popular approach is just to have like more teams that are formed around the feature areas. And so the product managers are usually pressured to ship more features. they're shipping, and like adoption of these features is oftentimes it like gets out of focus, especially when like the features are not shipped like very quickly, like the engineering organization is not that fast. And actually, this pressure to ship like more features brings like the disconnect of the product team and kind of the way the company is making money. And the product team like kind of starts to drift away from understanding revenue. The new features that the product team is working on are actually not always a good thing, right? So the more features we have, the more clunky our user experience is, and the slower is the product. And also like the performance of the product starts to degrade like with the scale. With that, like oftentimes like revenue is not growing as fast as it was growing like before. And so when the company was small, the revenue was growing faster, the company hired more people, but the revenue is growing slower. Like, what's the reason for that? In these situations, oftentimes the ROI of the product team is questioned, like the chief financial officer comes into place and like is asking like questions. Why do we need so many people on a product team and so many product managers? So this leads to PM's burnout. PM directors or managers are often replaced. And like all of this like creates a very kind of toxic atmosphere in the company, not very healthy. The question is like, is there a better way? And like the kind of simple idea like that I'm trying to bring with this presentation is that the product team and the product managers should like try to stay like close to the revenue and like keep their goals being set like around revenue, or at least be able to understand like if the activities they're bringing on, they're actually generating new revenue for the company. Interestingly enough, is that like oftentimes it's true for very small companies. So small companies that are still like surviving, they have this survival mode and they need like more money. So they're like more focused on revenue, and the product managers are very close to kind of revenue metrics in these situations. And then when like the company kind of grows again, like this disconnect like happens, and like the product managers are not focused on revenue that much anymore. And then again, like in some cases, when the company is like bigger and more successful, it starts kind of getting back to kind of revenue again. For example, like the bigger companies, they have very nice sets of experimentation platforms built so that like the product managers, for example, can A/B test new features and compare revenue from like the two cohorts instead of just like shipping something. Okay. So let's like kind of like dive deeper into how do we kind of connect these two things. And it's like the understanding of like product and revenue metrics like begins with the understanding of the financial model. Sometimes it's called also like a P&L artifact, metric tree. It's also called a growth model. So like all of these like can be something that is like a similar artifact to the one I'm showing on screen. So usually it's this artifact is something that is kept by either like a CEO, a chief financial officer, someone who's in charge of financials of the company, and it contains the kind of the incoming revenue. Again, for simplicity, let's assume it's like subscription-based model. So I will be using the examples with monthly recurring revenue in like most of the slides. But again, like this is like the revenue that is coming into the company with the decomposition by like the components of this revenue, the growth rate, the churn, and like the number of customers that we're getting into the company. So this is like the kind of the profit part. Then there is the loss part, which is like separate and can be present and can be not present. But again, for the product manager, the key thing is to understand like where the money is coming from for the company. Is it coming from new customers, existing customers? Do we have a churn problem, and so on? So the financial model gives like a lot of insights to that. If you have access to this artifact, great. If you don't have, maybe you can have access to like a subset of it, or like you can actually build one by yourself using the data that you have access to. So this one is also like an example of like a similar artifact. It's also like a financial model with all of these components of revenue. But also like you can see that like it's connected to some kind of product metrics at the bottom. And so there is also like a percentage of year-over-year growth for each of the metrics month by month, so that it's like visible what kind of metrics are actually growing year over year and which ones are not growing, for example. And also with like the help of such an artifact, for example, you can see if there is like a correlation between like your kind of like top line revenue metric, the monthly recurring revenue or the monthly recurring revenue growth rate, and for example, something that is you're tracking in product, right? Okay, so like this is like an example of like this high level bird view artifact. And like the important thing from it is to understand again, where does the money is coming from to your company, basically to understand the decomposition of your incoming revenue. So your monthly recurring revenue is like created from the net new monthly recurring revenue. So this is like the new amount of money that came in this month. And usually it comes from like the two big components. The first one is new business MRR, and the second is net dollar retention MRR. For the new business MRR, this is the money that are coming in from the new audience. Basically, they reflect how well are we monetizing the new audience. And usually this is something that marketing and sales team care very much about. The second component, net dollar retention MRR, is how well are we monetizing our existing audience. So basically it reflects how much same people buy from you, like if they buy from you more month over month. Usually this is the metric that, again, success team cares more about. So this is something that is also important to understand. Okay, so these two components. And like the kind of the product strategy of the company usually changes with the company size. So when the company is smaller, it's like more focused on like attracting new business MRR, new revenue from new customers, trying to delight and keep the customers who are just coming in, and trying to find the scalable channels of user acquisition and optimize the existing product funnel so that these people would actually generate revenue. Once the company scales and becomes bigger, so you start to have some kind of existing audience, which is very interesting because you can upsell and cross-sell more to the existing audience. And again, if the company is becoming even bigger and more successful, it often goes multi-product so that it could actually offer multiple products to kind of the same audience that it has, because it's much easier to sell to existing audience than to kind of acquire a new customer. So this kind of strategies change with scale, and the movement goes from more focusing on new business to focusing more on expansion MRR. Or the product team, how can the product team help to drive the new business MRR from the side of kind of the product? One of the key things that the product team should be thinking about is to start thinking about activation. So activation is a metric that is like a proxy metric to the new revenue, because it should at least reflect the share of new signups that reach the point where users understand your product's value and they take some meaningful actions in product. So it's like a very nice proxy metric between the product team and the revenue, because it actually connects the two things. But in order for this to actually work, you should have it well defined. So for example, how other companies define it, the famous one from Facebook, user should get 7 friends in 10 days. In PandaDoc, we had the user should send at least 1 document within 2 days after trial start. In Metabase, we have user executes 100 queries or invites more than 1 user in 3 days. So all of these are examples of an activation metric. And usually the first step would be to try to understand what kind of activation metric do you have on your side. So again, well-defined activation metric should be easily measurable. It should represent the value of your product. It should correlate with conversion well, again, to be a proxy between the product measurements and the revenue. And the important thing that's I really like is that the activation metric should actually show its result. These meaningful actions should be taken within 2-3 days after sign up, the kind of the very small interval right after people signed up. This is last piece is very important. So to figure the activation metric out, you need to kind of have a list of hypotheses. So in the format, user performed X events in Y days after sign up, where events are something that is you think it's meaningful. So you just create a list of these things. Then you run the correlation analysis for like this curves share of users who performed these events in like within 2 days or like 3 days after sign up. And the conversion on a weekly trend. So like you take the conversion historically, and like you also take the historical data from the customers who performed some specific events. So once you have this kind of correlations done, you can pick like the metric that correlates best. And also like it's important that it should be kind of also simple enough, and like it should represent the value from your product. So like not only correlation is important here, but it's also kind of like how well it actually represents what you are doing with your product. So sometimes correlation analysis doesn't work, but like usually it's possible to find something suitable. If it's not working, you can try running an odds ratio analysis, or the analysis that is called weight of evidence information value. So these are like more complicated things, and likely they would need like a help from a product analyst. Like the correlation analysis is easier to do. Oftentimes you can like find such a metric. If not, you can also like have like a composite one where you have performed X events or performed Z events, where like the events are like slightly different. For example, like in the case of the Metabase, to kind of to make the correlation again stronger. As a result, you will get like a visualization, something like that. Like the top line is the activation curve. So it's like a share of customers who performed like the kind of this activation events. And then you have like a curve beneath that, which is like conversion and retention for 40-day retention. So like on this visualization, you will be able to see that, like, for example, these things like very nicely correlate. And the good thing about activation is that it actually will be giving you kind of a prediction of conversion much, much faster than the actual conversion happens. So oftentimes you have like a trial period or like the kind of sales cycle, something else. So like the actual conversion happens like within 7 days, 14 days, like 30 days. So it's like quite a big period, right? So activation metric is great because it like predicts the conversion. It's like doing it much, much faster. And within like 1-2 days after sign up, you can already understand like very important things. For example, you can not only just use like activation for your goals as a product team, but also you can work together with a marketing team and understand like the traffic quality, like how does like the marketing spend and marketing campaigns, for example, how is it performing? Like, are they bringing up like a high quality traffic or not that much? Like how much quality does this paid spend actually have? You can also like monitor the changes and the bugs on the onboarding stage in product like very quickly. So like if something breaks, like this drops and spikes will be like visible, and it will help you also to like fix the issues faster. This metric is also like, it has like a lot of potential to actually for you as a product team to work on, meaning that you can improve the user experience, you can improve the onboarding, you can fix like the bugs and the core functionality, you can improve navigation and UX, introduce help and support. So there is like a separate huge topic on how to drive activation up. But like the key thing is that like it's actually something that you can work with and you can like grow it, right? So it's like it's not just like a metric that you will be looking at. This metric can also be gamed, but it's like a small minus. So if you're like A/B testing, for example, your top of the funnel, normally you don't look just at activation, but you also look like at a set of metrics. So again, like this is an example of like a metric set for top of the funnel A/B testing. Again, like there are like tools to do that. Like in PandaDoc, we didn't have like a tool, so we had just like the ability to split the users into cohorts, and like then we had a set of metrics for the control group, for the treatment group, and we could see on the on this dashboard the difference in percentages and like the p-value for this difference. So the key things here again, so like for example, if like the kind of the key metric for the A/B test would be activation, is to also check on the same cohort, is it also kind of like the trend for activation, is the result is positive also for conversion, but also mainly for new business recurring revenue and cumulative revenue for this cohort. So that's like it's actually like activation is dragging your revenue results forward. So also the things you can do with the activation, for example, you can also segment it. So segmenting is like a separate art, and like again, like could be a separate webinar and conversation of how exactly to segment your incoming users. But like the idea with segmenting activation is that like oftentimes there are segments that like really don't activate. So it really depends on like what kind of traffic comes in, and sometimes you would get like portions of traffic that really don't activate in comparison with like the other segments. There are like ways to fix these things. So you can like either like, for example, close sign up for this traffic or like not acquire this traffic if it's coming from a specific marketing campaign. Or you can also improve the user experience for like this segment and product. If, for example, the traffic is nice, but like you think that something is wrong. For example, in Metabase's example, we segmented the activation by question, where is your data stored? So we ask this question on sign up, and then like we've built like this activation curves for these segments by like the type of where they store their data. And we noticed that the customers with CSVs, so the ones who like store their data just in CSV files, so they don't really activate. And like there is a problem in our product that we're not addressing that very well. And that's probably the reason. So we might like fix this sooner or later. Okay. There are like other metrics on like the top of the funnel that are nice for tactical changes, but like maybe not like for for a lot of time. So there are like conversion optimizations that you can perform on the website, for example, to grow your rate from website visit to sign up. So usually maybe there you have like some marketing people doing that. It's like a nice metric from website visit to sign up, the conversion rate. But like it's like also like can be worked with, but like not hugely. The quality of your sign up, like oftentimes again, the signups now are very kind of long and tricky, and there are a lot of fields in them. So like from sign up start to sign up finished, how many people actually dropped off on this way is a very interesting metric, and it shows like you like if your sign up flow is too heavy, or vice versa, you can afford to collect like more data to understand more about your customers. So it's like a nice one, but tactical. Conversion rate, sign up finished to paid, like also nice metric. But again, like there are like not that many things that you can do with specifically conversion, mostly changes on the paywalls or again, like pricing changes, but like it's like really also hard, plus it's lagging. Number of refunds or number of refunds to the number of successful payments. So this is a metric that should be monitored, and like you can have an alert on it, but likely it's not something that can be like hugely optimized, well, unless you have some specific ideas for it. Okay, so this was like the part about metrics that are driving the new business revenue, metrics for the top of the funnel. Now let's move like to the second component, net dollar retention. So net dollar retention is like a very interesting thing, and like all investors love companies with great net dollar retention because it's considered to be something that is like fueling the growth very well. Because like if you're able to monetize your existing audience, you're not spending money on customer acquisition and on marketing. And so like this is like great. So basically you are able to kind of get more money from the same audience, which is like an awesome signal for investors. And usually they kind of prefer companies who are doing that efficiently. So strategically, you should be trying to understand like how to drive net dollar retention. The net dollar retention in monthly recurring revenue, it like consists of these four components. So from expansion revenue, reactivation revenue, minus contraction, minus churn. So basically like there are like these components are driving the net dollar retention and make it like either like positive or negative. Like out of these four components, the most important one is expansion. So expansion is like this kind of like a positive movement of revenue, meaning that the same customers are buying from you more. And it's actually a very interesting exercise to think like you as a product managers, how can you drive the expansion revenue with the help of the product? This like the big piece there is the function of pricing. So if your pricing is designed in a way that the product is like basically like the pricing is usage based, or there is like a value metric in your pricing that scales well. For example, you sell like seats or something else that is like consumable and can scale. This is like a nice thing that will likely drive some kind of expansion if the product like is good enough. But like if it isn't there, maybe like there is a way to think about that, right? To maybe consider to reconsider your pricing and to include like a scalable value metric, because it's actually also like driving the expansion very nicely if the customer with usage gets like to pay a little bit more, which is not great for sometimes for the customer, but really great for the company growth. There are like also like the kind of very simpler ways. Most of the companies have this. So for example, in your pricing, you would have like several pricing plans. You would have like the premium plus extra subscription plans, the plans that would be more expensive, and they would contain some premium functionality of your product. And like if you're able to sell those efficiently, like this is also a nice nice driver for expansion. You can also offer add-ons to your core product. Like you can build the add-ons, or you can like take some features out of your existing pricing plans and put them into the add-ons so that you don't need to build anything. So like a lot of these ideas are around pricing and packaging. And also like there is like a subset that is about like actually making your product more easy to collaborate or to consume more of what you sell. So this is something that you can think about together with like with the product managers in your company. Except for like the revenue, there are always like a lot of interesting metrics come into play about customer satisfaction, about NPS adoption, product North Stars, monthly active, daily active users, and similar. So there are like this like kind of set of metrics that are like sometimes good to have goals on, sometimes not very. So let's like quickly walk them through them. So NPS, Net Promoter Score, not my personal favorite metric. I think it's like not really actionable for product managers. It's lagging and it's slow to move. It's still like it goes down very quickly. For example, if you have like downtimes in your product, or like there are some like huge bugs, or for example, if you increase prices, so like NPS would go down in this situation, but like to kind of consistently drive it up, it's really hard. Oftentimes, like investors look at it because it's like, you know, the benchmark. If everyone is asking pretty much the same question, we can kind of compare like products one to another. But like it's still like very old school approach and likely not the best one. So instead of NPS, you can actually use the data from your product, what kind of features people are using, what kind of features they're adopting, what kind of use cases and jobs they're fulfilling. So this is done through like adoption metrics. One of the approaches is called TARS. You can Google it, and like it's on Reforge. Kind of like, again, simpler visualization of adoption would be a share of users, of your like active users. Usually those would be the paid users, the share of your paid users who used feature or completed a specific use case, for example, this week or this month, and you can have it on a trend. So if you have adoption for like all of your features, you can also get a picture of how well like your product is actually, again, adopted. Like, do people adopt everything, or they just adopt like 10% of what you have? There are like approaches to have a product team and to goal them around product North Star metrics. For me, like arguably product North Star is a repeated activation metric. So if you have like a well-defined activation metric, very likely that you're like it is the product North Star. So it's like, or it's like related very much. It can be a metric for a specific product team that works on like a new product or like on a specific feature. But like if it's like an add-on product, for example, it would be still better to measure like the performance of this add-on in revenue and have it kind of top metric in revenue, not like just in the usage. Monthly active, daily active users, and similar metrics. So these ones should be checked for correlation with revenue growth, because, you know, sometimes monthly active users are growing and revenue is not growing that fast. So, but like if they correlate, it could be like a nice metric for a product team, very popular in B2C and mobile. Still, like if you have like a huge number of users, it's very likely hard to move. So it needs additional input metrics and retention activities so that people kind of like get back into product and actually stay. Okay. Metrics that are really hard to move, like, and are often lagging indicators of what you're doing. Average revenue per user. So averages, if you have like, again, thousands of customers, averages move super slowly. And like the biggest impact on the average revenue per account would be having the pricing changes and the introduction of more expensive products or add-ons if you do that. LTV-like metrics are very slow to move. They're often calculated incorrectly, so also like not a fit for a product team. Churn rate is like good to know and benchmark yourself against, but like often churn is like a function of like the incoming traffic quality. So if you have a lot of again B2C traffic or prosumer traffic, then like the churn will be high anyway. Often like it's like too late to like work on the customers who are already going to churn, because the customers like who churn are those who did not activate, did not understand your product in the first place. So again, you should work on activation first and foremost. And from the financial perspective, you've also seen, so like to cover for churn in a dollar retention, you should be working on expansion, because there you have like actually a chance. There are tactics like offboarding flows and like coupons for people who cancel, and like different dining and past due messages that reduce involuntary churn, which are like nice to have, but it's like not strategic. So this is something that you can do once and like move on to something else more interesting. Okay. So looking at all of that, we can imagine our like product team that really cares about revenue. So for example, like this could be like a structure for like a product team that has like one part that is more focused on the new business recurring revenue, and the second part is focused on expansion revenue. And thus, like those two teams will be working closer, either like with marketing and sales on new business, or with success and support on expansion. Like inside of these teams, you could have like sub teams that are more focused on like the input metrics into new business revenue or into expansion revenue. So for example, for the core team, you could have like a team that is focused on premium features, and you could like drive more expansion from higher plans and premium versions of your product. You could have add-on teams that like work on like specific add-ons, and they're also like responsible for driving revenue from that. You could also have like a UX retention team that like focuses on product adoption, but this is like very likely less connected to revenue. So like it's like really hard. So they could just be focused on like working on adoption, like one feature by feature or use case by use case, if you have like multiple of them and they're like under adopted. Okay. In the end, some tips for like how to make this kind of framework more realistic. Again, like probably not a great idea to do that in 3 minutes. So it's like a material for like at least an hour of conversation. But again, to kind of give you a high level of like the prerequisites of like a nice data-driven organization. So you should have like a single source of truth for data that exists and is kept up to date. So this data should kind of be either put into a data warehouse, for example, data from Stripe, from product, from Zendesk, or like ticketing systems. So all of this data of like what's happening there should be put into like a single data warehouse. Usually data engineers or analysts can help you with that. So once you have this kind of single source of truth, you should have like some kind of models or data models on top of that, so that you have the kind of the tables that everyone trusts for the revenue, for account information, for product usage, and you can join these things between each other. So you can join the revenue and product usage, and like customer information and product usage, and so on. The more clear your data layer is, the better, because like this is kind of the prerequisite of success. So this data could also like live not in a data warehouse, but like in a production database replica. And for example, we also have Stripe data, and you can also already kind of get some insights from there. On top of like the nice data layer, you should have a metrics catalog, like a table of definitions of what do we calculate, how do we calculate, and who is responsible for keeping the metric up to date, and where like the actual dashboard with this metric lies. And then like on top of like the data layer, you could also have a self-service BI layer that the product managers can use to query the data. Usually it would be something like Metabase, like a simpler version, Amplitude Mixpanel, which are like okay-ish, but it's like harder to connect revenue data into Amplitude or Mixpanel. Usually it would be coming from CRM. So again, like not perfect, but like doable, right? So some kind of like self-service BI that is like simple enough for product managers to build like the reports on. Okay, key takeaways. Product managers should stay close to revenue, at least try to understand like what's happening with their financials. How does your company make money? How does it grow? Think on how to help the customer success teams, the marketing and sales teams to drive more revenue into the product. And in this situation, like if there are like more revenue metrics introduced into the structure of a product team and into like the heads of the product directors and product managers, the kind of the better cohesion will be created with like the rest of the teams that are also like trying to drive the company to success. That's it for today. So let's move to Q&A section, and please add me on LinkedIn if you would like. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya, for this great presentation. Let me know if you need help with the Q&A. We've got a lot of questions, 33 I'm seeing. And if you're up to it, we can go by most upvoted. So if you open the Q&A functionality, you'll see all the questions, and we can filter by most upvotes.
Okay, yeah, like I've switched to most upvotes. Okay, so there is one with 13 upvotes. What are effective short-term metrics or indicators used to evaluate the potential success of products with long revenue cycles of 12 to 24 months? Yeah, so like I was like talking about activation. So again, like as much as you can, please collect like the data of like what's trialers or people who just came into your product, what kind of things are they doing? If they're like having like a very high usage of things in product, like it's like a very good indicator. And like if you can like build an activation metric with that, at least like with the existing usage that you have, it's like a very nice thing to have. One more thing, it could be just like retention. So if the people are coming into a product and then they come in on like after some periods, like they come in the next day or the next week, so they actually return. This could also like be a nice short-term metric. You could also like have like a survey like during the onboarding period, so that like, for example, like you're asking the person, for example, like if the person is liking the product or not. So some kind of like customer satisfaction survey that would also like give you like a faster indicator if, for example, you still don't have the revenue data for another 12 to 24 months. Okay, I hope that I answered it. Let's move to the next one. How would you adapt this to fit B2B SaaS companies? Slower activation, more tricky to do A/B testing, and so on. So yeah, like slower activation, I would actually argue about that. So I mean, I think it's like in most of B2B tools, it's still like possible to figure out like a faster activation metric, maybe like not 2-3 days, maybe like a week, but it still will be faster than the kind of the conversion cycle. A/B testing is tricky. Yeah, like usually A/B testing, for A/B testing, you will be able to do that maybe like on the kind of the top of the funnel, and kind of the rest of the product is not really A/B testable. However, again, there are like modern approaches to A/B testing, which like do not require that much traffic, which is like an interesting thing to have. But those approaches, I'm talking about the approaches to A/B testing based on Bayesian statistics. So these usually require less traffic. So again, like it's like possible to find the ways to actually try to A/B test, and to A/B test basically on revenue more. There are like, again, like with B2B SaaS companies, more focus could be made into pricing, into how do you price and package. Changes in pricing packages are like very well visible on kind of on the financials, and you will be able to measure and to understand, was it like a good change or not a good change. And also like, again, like the approach of making the product, like having the premium versions, the add-on versions, the ability to kind of drive expansion is still like applicable to kind of most of the B2B tools. Okay, what is the difference between activation and conversion? So activation is the share of people who they after sign up, they completed some meaningful action in the product. So for example, for PandaDoc, it was sent a document, right? So the share of new signups who sent a document would be our activation metric, and they should send it within 2 days after sign up. Conversion rate is like how many customers, what is the share of people paid for the first time, for example, after they kind of entered your product. So the conversion rate would actually be indicating that you received like money from this customer, and this will be like the share of people who were able to pay for your product. Yeah, so like that's kind of the difference. And like the activation is like a product metric, so you can measure it on like the product behavior and user behavior, and conversion is usually happening like 7, 14 days, like 30 days, like after the sales cycle finished. So it's actually the fact of the purchase. What's the difference between activation and adoption? I have seen them being used interchangeably. So from, again, like how I've mentioned it in the presentation, so activation is a metric for the new users. So the new users, and you measure activation as a share of new users on, for example, on a weekly cohort trend who like performed a specific product action. Adoption is very vague, and like many companies are like defining it differently. The definition that I like is when you have like the kind of the full pool of your customers, you have the active customers number this month. For example, like in July, we had like 1,000 customers. So out of this 1,000 customers in this month, how many people used feature X? For example, 500 used this feature. And like this would be then like the adoption would be 50%. So 50% of the active customers in this month, they adopted like feature X. This would be like a very simplistic definition again, but like it's also like giving you a lot of insight. If you just, for example, like list all the functionality in your product and you build this like shares for each month, you will see that there are like very interesting kind of insights coming from there. And oftentimes you will see the features that are very under adopted, or like some kind of things that like no one is using like on a regular basis at least. So yeah, like adoption is usually measured from like the share is measured from your like all audience that you have, not just for the new users. Okay, what would be your recommendation when the company is just starting out on metrics? What's the must have to do and have? Yeah, so like the first thing that the company must have to do is like to kind of collect data. So the data, the underlying data again is like the kind of the crucial thing to have. So if the data is not good, the decisions won't be good as well. So this is like, again, the prerequisite. So the company should try to understand which systems contain the data that is interesting. And again, this would usually be revenue data. So the revenue data lives in Stripe subscription system or something similar that actually processes the credit cards. And the kind of product behavior. The product behavior is sometimes it contains like it's already, for example, you have a production database and like your product is just like writing the kind of some statistics about like the product usage right in the production database. So you can just use that data and you can already join it with the revenue, and it's already a very kind of nice combination of insights that you can do out of that. But like for this production data, you have to build like a database replica so that like you don't hurt the people who are like actually like using the product. So like if there is like an ability to like set something up additionally on top of that, like usually the company would set up some event tracking, product event tracking, so that like you could see the product behavior. And there are like a lot of like tools or systems of how this is usually done. For example, you can use Segment, maybe one of the most popular things. So and you start like tracking the product events in Segment. through Segment, and they get into like your data warehouse, and all of this then can be kind of again joined with revenue, and you can see the insights on top of that. Probably we need like another webinar just like to answer this question, because like, yeah, it's really a tricky one, and it's not straightforward. That's true. So yeah, like I can just like hope that you will figure it out. Okay, I think that we can wrap it up. Sorry that I didn't answer all questions, but like we're at time.